This episode examines a book written in real time under bombardment while images of devastation circulated endlessly and official justifications hardened into routine. Genocide in Gaza by Shlaim is not an exercise in retrospective moral judgment. It's an attempt to fix responsibility in the historical record before denial sets in. The book rejects the language of tragic inevitability and refuses to treat Gaza as a humanitarian catastrophe that periodically erupts. Instead, it presents the destruction as the end point of a political logic that has been cultivated, defended, and refined over decades. That distinction matters. When violence is framed as episodic, it invites regret and temporary outrage. When it's understood as structural, it demands accountability. Schleim's concern is not whether the devastation shocks the conscience, but whether it follows a pattern, and whether that pattern has been actively maintained. Schleim's intervention carries particular weight because of his biography as much as his scholarship. Born in Baghdad in 1945 to an Iraqi Jewish family, he grew up in Israel, served in the Israeli military, and moved to Britain in the mid-1960s to study. When war broke out in 1967, he returned briefly to serve before resuming his studies and later building an academic career in the UK. He became known as one of the Israeli new historians, scholars who challenged state narratives using Israeli archives themselves, dismantling myths around Israel's founding, its wars, and its claims of moral exceptionalism. For much of his career, his method was archival and forensic. In this book, he steps out of the archive and into the present, arguing that scholarly detachment becomes untenable when mass killing is openly rationalized. This shift does not represent a break with his earlier work, but its logical extension. Gaza is not treated as an unfortunate outlier or a failure of policy. It's analyzed as a managed space within settler colonial system designed to contain, fragment, and neutralize Palestinian political life. Shlaim rejects the idea that Israel has repeatedly sought peace and repeatedly failed. Instead, he argues that it has sought control and largely achieved it. Gaza functions as a sealed pressure chamber subjected to siege, deprivation, and periodic destruction. Violence is not a last resort in this system, it's one of its governing tools. The book pays close attention to language, particularly military metaphors that normalize harm. Phrases such as mowing the lawn are not dismissed as a rhetorical excess, but examined as indicators of intent. They reveal how destruction has been routinized, rendered technical, and stripped of moral urgency. When violence is framed as maintenance, outrage is recast as naivete. Shlaim documents not only deaths, but the systematic destruction of the conditions that make civilian life possible. Entire residential areas have been leveled, hospitals rendered inoperable, universities erased, water systems destroyed, and agricultural land ruined. The accumulation is deliberate. When destruction is comprehensive and repetitive, the claim that it is incidental or accidental becomes increasingly implausible. To describe this totality, Shlaim introduces a grim analytical vocabulary: domicide, scholasticide, ecocide, iconocide. These are not rhetorical flourishes, but attempts to name processes that conventional language struggles to contain. When violence targets not only people, but the social fabric itself, the categories used to excuse it begin to collapse. A central concern of the book is the manipulation of international law. Shlaim scrutinizes the routine invocation of Israel's right to self-defense by Western governments and media. He does not deny Israel's security concerns, but he challenges the legal framing that treats self-defense as an all-purpose justification. When an occupying power claims self-defense against a population it controls, besieges, and denies political rights, The law becomes stretched beyond recognition. In practice, legal language becomes an alibi. Words do not merely describe events, they authorize them. Schleim's treatment of Hamas is cautious and deliberate. He condemns the killing of civilians and expresses unease with romanticizing armed struggle. That position is ethically intelligible, but it risks detaching violence from the conditions that produce it. Under international law, peoples living under military occupation return the right to resist, including through armed means. Palestinian resistance is often acknowledged in theory and denied in practice, discussed as moral deviation rather than structural consequence. The insistence on clear distinctions between civilians and combatants also become increasingly fragile in the Israeli context. Universal conscription, armed settlers, reservists embedded in civilian life, and pervasive militarization blur categories that external observers treat as fixed. This does not abolish ethical limits, but it complicates moral accounting. Armed resistance does not emerge in a vacuum. It emerges where political horizons have been systematically closed. Condemning resistance without confronting the permanence of domination risks reproducing the asymmetry the book otherwise exposes. The book also situates Gaza within a long imperial history, particularly Britain's role in Palestine. Schleim's account of the Balfour Declaration is unsparing. It promised political rights to a minority while rendering the majority politically invisible, reflecting an imperial mindset that prioritized strategic interests over indigenous rights. That mindset, he argues, has never fully disappeared. It continues to shape Western responses that privilege order and alliances over justice. Genocide in Gaza does not offer solutions, roadmaps, or comforting conclusions. It offers clarity, and clarity can be unsettling. It insists that what's happening be named accurately, situated historically, and recorded before denial and revision take hold. This is not a neutral book, because neutrality in the face of systematic destruction is not an innocent position. Shlaim writes with sorrow and anger, but also with precision. He understands that memory is a battlefield and that silence in moments like this is never passive. The book stands as an attempt to write against erasure and to force a reckoning that many would prefer to postpone indefinitely.